Julius Caesar suffered from epilepsy. In the ancient world, this was called the falling sickness, and it carried enormous stigma. Senators whispered about it. Enemies mocked it. A man who collapsed and convulsed on the floor of the forum was, by Roman standards, touched by madness or cursed by the gods. Caesar never hid it. He had seizures in public. He had one in front of his troops in Thapsus. He had episodes that his enemies documented in detail, hoping the accounts would humiliate him. And Caesar's response to every one of these incidents was the same: complete, unshakable composure after the fact. No denial. No shame. No attempt to spin the narrative. This is not what a weak man does. This is what a man with total psychological control does. By refusing to hide his condition, Caesar did several things simultaneously. First, he neutralized the weapon. If you cannot be embarrassed by something, your enemies cannot use it against you. The moment Caesar treated his epilepsy as simply a fact, unremarkable, unimportant, beneath comment, anyone who tried to weaponize it looked petty, small, threatened. Second, and far more importantly, he used it to build an almost mythological identity. Because in Roman culture, the epilepsy of powerful men was sometimes reframed as divine possession. Julius, the man who communes with something beyond ordinary understanding. The man who falls and rises. The man whose body is visited by forces too large for ordinary flesh. Caesar didn't manufacture that narrative. He simply left space for it, and watched the Roman imagination fill it in. This is the first lesson in Caesar psychology. Never fight the weakness. Absorb it. Make it so thoroughly yours that it becomes untouchable, and then watch it transform into mistake. Caesar cried. Frequently. Publicly. Strategically. When he discovered Pompey's severed head, presented to him by the Egyptian court as a gift after the Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar wept. Pompey had been his greatest rival, the man who had tried to destroy him. And Caesar wept. When he delivered the funeral oration for his Aunt Julia, he held up a mask of her face, a Roman tradition, and he broke down. Visibly. In front of thousands. When he returned to Rome after years of brutal campaigning in Gaul, he chose specific moments of public emotion with the precision of a theater director. Were these tears real? Probably some were. Probably some weren't. But the psychological effect was identical either way. Here is what tears do in a political leader. They make power seem safe. The Roman Senate feared Caesar. The aristocracy feared him. The optimates, the conservative elite who believed the republic was being dismantled in front of their eyes, were terrified of him. And a terrified person is a dangerous person. A cornered animal bites. But a man who weeps at his enemy's death? That man is not a tyrant. That man feels. That man has a heart. And the moment your opponent believes you have a heart, they lower their guard. Not entirely, not permanently, but just enough. Caesar's public grief functioned as de-escalation. It was emotional propaganda. It said, "I am not the monster you fear." And in that brief window of reassurance, Caesar moved his chess pieces forward. Modern research on persuasion confirms the mechanism. Emotional disclosure by high-status individuals triggers what psychologists call parasocial intimacy, the sense of knowing someone, of being trusted by them. When Caesar wept, every soldier and senator in that crowd felt, however briefly, like they were witnessing something real, something private. And that false intimacy became loyalty. Loyalty became power. Caesar was one of the wealthiest, most educated, most ruthlessly ambitious men in the Roman world. He was a patrician. His family, the Julii, claimed descent from the goddess Venus herself. And he made himself look like a man of the people. He spoke in the forum without theatrical props or elaborate performance. His oratory was praised for its directness, its clarity, its lack of pretension, in a culture where elaborate rhetorical flourishes were the expected currency of political speech. Cicero, who despised Caesar politically, nevertheless called his prose style the finest in Rome. Pure, unadorned, stripped of excess. This wasn't accident. This was a calculated register, the voice of a man who has nothing to prove, of a man so secure in his power that he doesn't need to perform it. He remembered soldiers' names, individual soldiers, in legions of thousands. He would ride along his lines before battle and call men by name, men who had served with him for years, men who had crossed frozen rivers and crawled through Gallic marshes. To be seen, to be named, by the most powerful man in the known world, that experience creates a bond that no salary and no threat can replicate. He sat among his troops. He ate what they ate. He marched when they marched. Caesar was famously fast on the move, and he kept pace with his infantry. He was in his 50s during some of the most grueling campaigns in Roman history, and he walked. Now understand the psychology of this. Caesar didn't need to do any of it. He had legions who would fight for pay, for glory, for Rome. But he wanted soldiers who would die for him personally. And to get that, to convert a professional military relationship into something closer to personal devotion, he had to make himself approachable. Human. One of them. The perceived vulnerability here was social, not physical. I am not above you. I eat, I march, I bleed alongside you. And that manufactured equality, from a man who was profoundly, definitively not equal to anyone in that army, is one of the most sophisticated uses of psychological positioning in military history. After Caesar defeated his enemies in the Roman civil wars, he did something that shocked the ancient world. He let them live. Pompey's former generals. Senators who had openly supported the opposition. Men who had fought against him in Spain, in Greece, in Africa. Caesar pardoned them. Publicly. Formally. With great ceremony. He called his policy clementia, mercy, and he made sure everyone knew about it. This looked like magnanimity. It felt like forgiveness. It was neither. It was the most psychologically devastating move he could have made. Because here is what clemency does to an enemy. It creates a debt they can never repay. A man who has defeated you and then spared you doesn't free you. He binds you more completely than any chain. You are now obligated to him, and that obligation is infinite, because what he gave you was your life. What could you possibly offer in return that would balance that ledger? Marcus Junius Brutus, the man who would ultimately drive a knife into Caesar on the Ides of March, had fought against Caesar at Pharsalus. Caesar's orders to his officers before the battle: find Brutus and bring him back alive. Spare him. Caesar valued Brutus's life above all other enemies on that field. Brutus was pardoned, elevated, given positions of honor, and he stabbed Caesar anyway. This is the one place where Caesar's psychological model failed, because clemency as domination only works on people who experience the debt. Brutus, twisted by his own ideology, his own identity as a defender of the Republic, reframed Caesar's mercy not as a gift but as an insult, proof that Caesar considered him no threat. Proof of Caesar's arrogance. The mercy that was supposed to bind Brutus instead enraged him. Caesar's system of manufactured vulnerability required one thing to function: that the people around him continue to perceive him as human. The moment he stopped performing vulnerability, the moment, in the final months of his life, that he became openly godlike, openly monarchical, openly beyond accountability, the illusion cracked. And the cracks were fatal. In the last year of his life, Caesar made a series of decisions that dismantled everything he had built. He accepted the title of Dictator Perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity. Not a temporary emergency measure. Permanent. Forever. He appeared in public in triumphal purple robes, the color of kings, the color Rome had abolished with the monarchy 5 centuries before. He sat, rather than standing, when the Senate approached him, a devastating symbolic gesture in a culture built on formal hierarchy. He allowed his face to be stamped on coins while he was still alive, something no Roman had ever done. Every single one of these acts said the same thing: I am no longer one of you. And in that moment, the entire architecture of his power began to collapse. Because Caesar's genius had always rested on a paradox. The most powerful man in Rome was also, psychologically, the most accessible, the most human, the most vulnerable seeming. Strip away the vulnerability, and what you have is a tyrant. And Rome had a deep cultural allergy to tyrants. The conspiracy grew not in the shadows of failure, but in the shadow of his greatest success. 23 stab wounds on the floor of the theater of Pompey. The man who had mastered the psychology of perceived vulnerability died because he forgot to perform it. Julius Caesar's story is not really about Rome. It's about a truth that runs through every boardroom, every political campaign, every human relationship built on power. Strength displayed openly breeds resentment. Strength wrapped in apparent vulnerability breeds devotion. The epilepsy wasn't a weakness. The tears weren't weakness. The clemency wasn't weakness. They were the architecture of dominance, a system so sophisticated that even the people inside it couldn't see the walls. Caesar was not a good man. He was not a gentle man. He killed more than 1 million people in Gaul, by ancient accounts. He was ruthless, self-serving, and consumed by ambition of a scale that even Rome found difficult to contain. But he was a brilliant psychologist, and his greatest insight, the one that built an empire from a single man's willpower, was this: people do not follow power. People follow the illusion of access to power. Give them the feeling that they know you, that they have seen you broken and watched you rise, that you march in their dust and eat their bread and remember their names, and they will hand you everything. The tragedy of Caesar is not the knives on the Ides of March. The tragedy is that he knew exactly how to avoid them. And in the end, he couldn't resist becoming the very thing he had spent a lifetime pretending not to be. Control the perception. Never drop the mask. Or if you must, make sure it's you holding it.